Maybe we should go to several more?
Okay.
First one is about your book. You are writing a book about which president you mean, President Obama or which president? First, you have mentioned about the importance of negotiation and why United States don't negotiate with Hezbollah or Hamas. So there are more important part in the two countries. And how do you see how we solve the problem of the Palestinian refugee in Lebanon? The last one, why the media is being selective, especially during the war? Thank you.
What was the last one?
Why the media is being selective to the media?
Our media?
Like CNN and other. Thank you.
4 questions.
Let's see. Let's take a couple.
My name is Samir. You mentioned that Iran, like other nuclear power in the making, should we say, is in battle, has a sense of insecurity and a sense of entitlement. You also mentioned that now we're in a period of negotiations for sanctions, which I get the impression you believe won't work. Assuming that they don't work, and Iran goes on with the nuclear program it is following so doggedly, what's going to happen? Israel finds this state of an atomic Iran, nuclear Iran, not a situation it can live with. So you said that the likelihood of a conflict in 2010 is unlikely. What's going to happen down the road in 2011 and beyond? Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
On the president's book, I'm looking at presidential greatness, a short book, trying to define what it means. How come it's been absent, and can it ever return? And my working hypothesis is that in our system, because it's so slow to move, you need one thing. You need nation-encumbering crisis. Without a nation-encumbering crisis, without a sense of urgency, the system will not respond to the great man or woman. And our greatest presidents, one in each century, one in the 18th, one in the 19th, and one in the 20th. And we only had 3 out of 43. All grappled with nation-encumbering crisis, which is why they were great. I mean, Americans don't really bestow and think of their leaders as great. Peter the Great, Catherine the Great, Alexander the Great. The Europeans do this. We don't. We tear down our leaders even while we hope that the next great one is around the corner. So what does it require to have a great president? How come since Franklin Roosevelt, who in my judgment was our last truly great president, we haven't had another one? And remember, if we have one a century, you could argue we're overdue, right? And then what would it take to produce another one? On Hamas and Hezbollah, there are 2 different distinctions here. On Hamas, which is the question I get all the time, I'll be very clear. Palestinian unity, which my Palestinian friends tell me is completely out of the question and unreasonable in anything more than a tactical manner, is a necessary prerequisite to Israeli-Palestinian peace. Why? Because unless you have control over unless you have a monopoly over the forces of violence within any society, your capacity to function as an effective state to your constituents, let alone your neighbors, you can't do it. And right now you have a very difficult situation. You have 2 self-governing communities with 2 separate sets of security services, supported by 2 separate sets of patrons, with 2 separate funding streams, and 2 separate visions of what constitutes Palestinian national aspirations. And this is 50 plus years after the emergence of the organizational embodiment of Palestinian nationalism, the PLO, credible movements of national liberation or non-state actors must have discipline and unity. It was true of the Viet Cong. It was true of the FLN in Algeria. It's true of all non-state actors that are consider themselves credible and who emerge as military powers, even in the local context. Hezbollah may be an example of an organization with great discipline and great structure. The Palestinian National Movement lacks that. We can't fix that. We really can't. Now, if you were to tell me that a U.S.-Hamas dialogue, as part of a broader strategy to crack open the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, was necessary to Mahmoud Abbas or even to an Israeli prime minister. Because look, let's face it, when the Israelis want peace and quiet, they don't go to Mahmoud Abbas, they go to Hamas. When the Israelis want Gilad Shalit released, they don't go to Mahmoud Abbas, they go to Hamas. Hamas has emerged, you'd have to be blind, even with all of its imperfections and its failings, and the fact that it hasn't delivered on so many of the expectations. It's still a force to be reckoned with. My problem with a dialogue with Hamas is very simple. It's not even a moral or an ethical problem. It's the key to an empty room. Right now, it's the key to an empty room. It will only make people angry, including Mahmoud Abbas, without effect and without consequence. If you were to tell me that it should be part of a broader strategy to actually move the Israeli-Palestinian conflict forward, that's another story. And that's why this administration will not initiate, as a freestanding proposition, a dialogue just to what? To find out more information? To try to moderate the Hamas leadership? I mean, no, I don't, I have no problem with talking, but talking has to serve a purpose without a downside that will essentially negate the reasons you're engaging to begin with. It's just not smart. Hezbollah is a different story, isn't it? I mean, it's now part of a duly constituted Lebanese government with which we deal. And it seems to me, even if you could get by the statutory restrictions which Congress imposes of providing material assistance, I'm not sure those statutory restrictions, by the way, would prevent actual dialogue. I don't think there's any law that would prevent an American diplomat in Beirut from engaging with Hamas, with Hezbollah. I think it's there. I think it's a question of what's the point, where's the strategy, and what are the downsides. Governing in America is about choosing. You have to choose what things you want that are important to you and how you want to fight. Because every time you take on an issue, particularly when there's a domestic political residence, there's a downside. And in that respect, I'm not sure, and Hezbollah may feel the same way, by the way, with respect to engaging with us. I'm not sure I could point to a compelling upside right now in having such a dialogue. I wish I could answer your question. I'm smart enough to know, however, that there is not a human being anywhere on this planet that could answer the question that you pose. And it is, by the way, a critically important question. If you're an Israeli prime minister, and I realize that the prospects of Iran actually striking Israel with a nuclear weapon are remote. If you're an Israeli prime minister, you are thinking right now the following: I don't want to do this, because if I do this, the price of oil is going to quadruple. If I do this, a very hesitant American recovery, a recession, is going to be fundamentally compromised. If I do this, I am putting at risk, because Iran will heat up the situation in Iraq and Afghanistan at a time when we are trying to extricate ourselves we will have another problem. So you're the Israeli prime minister. You know what happened in Suez. You know that Ben-Gurion's decision to link his fortunes to France and Britain in an effort to depose Nasser ended up causing an international crisis which caused an American Republican president to threaten sanctions and to force Israel to withdraw. They actually threatened sanctions against the British as well, Eisenhower. You don't want this. By the same token, you are weighing, particularly with this Israeli prime minister, a man who has made Iran a fundamental part of his narrative, not just for a decade, but since the 80s. You are the Israeli prime minister, and you are asking yourself the following question. Do I want to be the Israeli prime minister on whose watch Iran acquired a deliverable nuclear weapon without cost or without consequence? That is the question that you are going to ask yourself. If you're an American president who pledged during the campaign and repeatedly thereafter that he would go to extreme lengths or great lengths to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, do you want to be the American president on whose watch Iran acquired a nuclear weapon without cost or without consequence? These are the two sets of questions that both the Prime Minister of Israel, whoever he or she is, and the current President of the United States, we know that Barack Obama will face this decision within the next 2.5 to 3 years. And if he's a two-term president, he will certainly face it. And I don't have an answer for you. I do not have an answer.
I have 3 more questions.
I'm General Michel Nahas. When you talked about urgency, I mean, urgency needs at least the two parts. I mean, the Palestinians and the Israelis, because if the United States will be have its role, I mean, for this peace. I mean, I don't see, in my point of view, that Israel has this urgency. Do you see, from your point of view, that Israel is still dreaming? I mean, the Israelis does have still the illusion of the great Israel from the Nile to the Tiger, and that possibly, I mean, with this love that exists between the presidents of the United States and the prime ministers of Israel, that this led to the war of Iraq, where they are preparing maybe the soil to those Israeli prime ministers who can fulfill their dreams in the future. And one more small question: do you think that not talking to Hamas is only related to it will take us to an empty room, or is it because Hamas is the only party in the Arab world that does not recognize the existence of Israel? Thank you.
Dr. Miller, second question related to what you talk about. How do you explain the declaration and the speeches of the American leaders about the military capacity of Hezbollah, or the military power of Hezbollah now? I mean, the muscles, and how do you explain it? It is indication of something, I mean, sooner war?
Okay, give it.
Thank you. My name is Hadi Rashid. I'm a university professor. I want to get back a little bit over the Hezbollah track. In fact, your answer didn't satisfy my recognition about the American laws, because there's a major legal barrier, according to my understandings, which has to be broken before any talk with this Lebanese party. The first one is the terrorist organization lists that you have enacted several years ago, and which undertakes between the lines directly Hezbollah. And a very recent law, the media sanctions law enacted in 2009, and which prohibits some major Mid-Eastern media to broadcast what this new law takes for facilitating aggressive approach toward America. So before any diplomatic approach with Hezbollah, I think there's a legal barrier, and you have to make some moves over your inside system before making this approach. This is my question.
Yeah, you may be right. I haven't read,
Let's take the last question.
all right, but just in response to this one, I haven't read the statute. You may be right.
Okay.
He's a law professor.
Well, you mentioned something about democracy and the attitude of the United States toward Israel because they share the same values of democracy. Well, what about the democratization of the Arab world? Does that interest the American strategies? Does it have any relevance to the issues of Arab-Israeli conflict, the American policy towards the Arab world? And if so, how do they think this democratization should come through? And what are the prerequisites? Does it affect the American policy? Should the United States policy be more balanced in order to push forward the democratic agenda in the Arab world or not?
You know,
Yeah.
all right, I'm a great believer in American exceptionalism, but in American exceptionalism that stops at the water's edge. I voted for Barack Obama, not because I knew who he was, but because his election represented a validation of a system of government, which I do value, which despite all of its imperfections is quite remarkable. There is no other democratic polity in the world that could ever elect a man whose wife is a direct descendant of slaves, a man of color, a man who is still despised by millions of his fellow citizens. Only an American polity committed to the notion that individuals count in this world could have done such a thing. But that's our system. And we've gone from paying no attention to human rights, rule of law, political pluralism, until the Bush administration, to paying an enormous amount of attention